Colorado Territory, 1878. The snow fell thick and silent, blanketing the rugged foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in pristine white. Colt Prescott pulled his collar tighter against the biting wind as his horse trudged through the deepening drifts. At 26, he had already seen enough hardship to last several lifetimes. The war between the states had stolen his youth, and 3 years working cattle drives had hardened whatever softness remained in him. Colt believed the frontier demanded solitude from a man. Companionship was a luxury that got people killed in these unforgiving lands. Better to face the wilderness alone than to watch someone you care about suffer or die because of your mistakes. His weathered but youthful face remained stoic as he surveyed the darkening horizon. He had square shoulders, a lean, muscular build earned from hard work, and eyes the color of a summer storm. A few days of light stubble covered his jaw, but unlike many cowboys who embraced a wilder appearance, Colt maintained a certain tidiness about himself, a remnant of military discipline that never quite left him. The blizzard had caught him by surprise, coming in faster and fiercer than forecasted. Now, with darkness falling, his original plan to reach Silverton before nightfall seemed foolish. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chance, snorted and shook its head, ice forming on its whiskers. "I know, boy," Colt said, patting the animal's neck. "We need shelter." Through the swirling snow, he spotted a faint glow in the distance. A cabin, perhaps, or a small ranch house. Shelter, at the very least, and right now that was all that mattered. He urged Chance toward the light, hoping whoever owned the place would be hospitable enough to offer a roof for the night. Out here, turning away travelers in such conditions was practically a death sentence, but Colt had encountered all types on the frontier. He approached cautiously, ever mindful of the fact that not everyone welcomed strangers. As he drew closer, he could make out a modest cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. A small barn stood nearby, offering potential shelter for Chance. Colt dismounted with stiff legs and led his horse to the cabin door. He knocked firmly, waiting as the wind howled around him. After several moments, the door creaked open, and Colt found himself face to face with the barrel of a rifle. "State your business," a woman's voice commanded, steady but tense. "Just looking for shelter from the storm, ma'am," Colt replied, raising his hands slightly. "My name is Colt Prescott. I was heading to Silverton when the blizzard hit." The rifle lowered slightly, revealing a young woman with striking features. She was beautiful in a way that seemed out of place on the frontier, not weathered or hardened like most who survived out here. She had chestnut brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes that reminded Colt of wildflowers in spring. She wore a simple blue dress with a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You can stable your horse in the barn," she said after a moment of consideration. "Then come inside. But the rifle stays with me until I'm certain you mean no harm." "Fair enough," Colt replied with a nod. "Thank you, miss." "Vivian," she said, "Vivian O'Connor." 10 minutes later, having seen to Chance's comfort in the small but well-maintained barn, Colt stamped the snow from his boots and entered the cabin. The warmth from the fireplace hit him immediately, making him realize just how cold he had been. The interior was modest but neat, with handmade furniture and a few personal touches that spoke of care rather than luxury. "How old are you, Mr. Prescott?" Vivian asked directly as she placed the rifle within reach but no longer aimed at him. 26, he answered honestly, sensing her wariness. "And you, Miss O'Connor?" 22, she replied, "and alone, as you can see, which is why I'm cautious about strangers." "A wise approach," Colt said, removing his hat. "I appreciate your hospitality. Not many would open their door on a night like this." "I wouldn't turn anyone away to freeze," she said, gesturing toward a chair. "You can warm yourself by the fire. There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." As Colt settled near the hearth, he studied Vivian more carefully. There was something in her demeanor that spoke of recent hardship, a tension in her shoulders, a careful way she moved around him. Living alone in these parts wasn't common for a young woman. There was a story there, but Colt knew better than to pry into others' business. "You have a nice place here," he commented instead. "Been here long." "It was my father's homestead," she answered, ladling stew into a bowl. "He passed last spring. Pneumonia took him quick." "I'm sorry for your loss," Colt said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied, handing him the bowl. "Most folks expected me to sell the place and head back east to my mother's people, or find a husband right away." "But you stayed," Colt observed. This is my home, she said simply, a flash of determination in her eyes. I won't be driven from it by fear or convention. As Colt ate the hearty stew, venison with root vegetables and herbs, he couldn't help but admire her resolve. Still, surviving alone out here was a harsh reality, especially for someone so young. The frontier didn't play favorites. It claimed the lives of the strong and weak alike, often without warning or mercy. The storm's getting worse, Vivian noted, peering through the frost-rimmed window. You're welcome to sleep by the fire tonight. It wouldn't be right to send you back out there. I'm grateful, Colt said. I can pay you for your trouble. Not necessary, she replied, just basic human decency. As the evening wore on, they maintained a respectful distance. Vivian kept herself busy with small tasks around the cabin, while Colt tended the fire and offered to mend a loose chair leg he'd noticed. Conversation remained sparse, but the silence wasn't entirely uncomfortable. When Vivian finally retired to the small bedroom at the back of the cabin, she hesitated at the door. Mr. Prescott, she said quietly, I have my father's pistol beside my bed. I know how to use it. Colt nodded, understanding her message clearly. You'll have no trouble from me, Miss O'Connor. You have my word. Morning brought a temporary break in the storm, though the sky threatened more snow by afternoon. Colt stepped outside to check on Chance and take stock of their situation. The drifts were too deep for safe travel to Silverton. He was effectively stranded, at least for another day. When he returned to the cabin, he found Vivian preparing a simple breakfast of biscuits and coffee. The pass to Silverton will be impassable for a day or two, she said, nodding toward the window. You're welcome to stay until it clears, provided you help with the chores. I've got animals that need tending regardless of weather. I'd be happy to earn my keep, Colt replied, grateful for both her hospitality and her practicality. I'm handy with most ranch work. Over breakfast, Vivian explained the immediate tasks, caring for the small herd of goats she kept in a lean-to attached to the barn, chopping more firewood, and repairing a section of fencing that had been damaged in a previous storm. Colt listened attentively, noting the methodical way she ran her small homestead. This wasn't a woman playing at independence. She knew what she was doing. The day passed in productive work. Despite the cold, Colt found satisfaction in the physical labor. By mid-afternoon, he had repaired the fence, chopped enough wood to last several days, and helped Vivian check her trap lines, which yielded 2 rabbits for their supper. As they worked side by side, skinning the rabbits outside the cabin, Colt noticed a small scar on Vivian's forearm. Mountain lion, she explained, following his gaze, last summer. It was after the goats, and I was careless. You fought it off yourself, Colt asked, impressed. Father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she said. Said a woman alone needs to be twice as capable as any man if she wants to survive out here. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, she agreed, a sad smile crossing her face. Ornery as the day is long, but fair and honest. He came out here after my mother died, bringing me with him. Said we needed a fresh start away from the memories. The frontier has a way of either breaking people or forging them stronger, Colt observed. Which did it do to you, Mr. Prescott? Vivian asked, her eyes meeting his directly. The question caught him off guard. That remains to be seen, I suppose. That evening, as another snowfall began, they sat across from each other at Vivian's small table, sharing rabbit stew and the last of a loaf of bread she had baked the previous day. What brings you to these parts? She asked. You don't strike me as a drifter, despite your current circumstances. I've been working at the Double Cross Ranch near Durango, Colt explained. The owner, Mr. Thornton, sent me to negotiate a timber contract in Silverton. The ranch is expanding, building new corrals and bunkhouses. Thornton has a good reputation, Vivian noted. Fair wages from what I hear. He's a decent employer, Colt agreed. Better than most I've worked for. And before that, she pressed gently. Colt hesitated, unused to talking about his past. Cattle drives mostly after the war, Texas to Kansas, following the herds north. You fought in the war, she asked, her expression softening slightly. Union cavalry, he answered simply, not wanting to elaborate on those memories. Joined up in '63 when I was 17. Lied about my age. Vivian seemed to sense his reluctance to delve deeper. Well, Mr. Prescott, it seems we've both had our share of challenges. Call me Colt, he said, Mr. Prescott makes me feel like I should be looking over my shoulder for my father. Then I'm Vivian, she replied with a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing a warmth to her features that made Colt's chest tighten unexpectedly. Later that night, as the wind howled outside and snow continued to fall, they sat before the fire. Vivian mended a tear in one of her father's old shirts that she now wore for work, while Colt cleaned his revolver, a habit ingrained from his military days. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Colt asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Vivian's hands paused momentarily. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but loneliness seems a fair price for independence. In town, I'm seen as either an object of pity or an opportunity, a young woman with land who needs a husband to take care of her." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "The frontier doesn't leave much room for choices, especially for women," Colt observed. "Which is why I guard my choices all the more fiercely," she replied. "What about you? Does the solitary life of a cowhand suit you?" Colt considered her question carefully. "It's easier not to form attachments," he said finally. "People you care about become vulnerabilities. Out here, vulnerability gets you killed." "Is that what the war taught you?" "The war and everything after," he confirmed. "I've buried too many friends who trusted the wrong person or let their guard down at the wrong moment." Vivian's eyes met his across the firelight. "That sounds like a lonely way to live, Colt." "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but it's a reliable one." The storm intensified overnight, bringing with it plummeting temperatures that tested the cabin's sturdy but aging construction. Colt awoke before dawn to find the fire had burned down to embers, and the interior of the cabin had grown dangerously cold. He quietly stoked the flames, adding logs until the fire blazed once more, then pulled on his boots to check the animals. Outside, the world was white and hostile. The wind cut like a knife, driving snow into every exposed inch of skin. Colt fought his way to the barn, where he found the goats huddled together for warmth. The linta had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow, forcing the animals into the barn proper. After ensuring they had feed and unfrozen water, he made his way back to the cabin. Vivian was awake when he returned, concern evident on her face. The animals. "Safe in the barn," Colt assured her, stomping snow from his boots, "but the linta needs repairs." The weight of the snow was too much for it. "That's the third time this winter," she said with a sigh. "Father meant to reinforce it before." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "We'll need to fix it properly once the storm passes." Colt noticed her use of "we," but didn't comment on it. "The pass to Silverton will be closed for days at this rate. I'd be happy to help with repairs before I go." Vivian nodded gratefully, then gasped as she looked more closely at his face. "Your cheek is frostbitten," she said, moving toward him. Colt touched his face, surprised to find the skin numb. "It's nothing serious." "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a chair near the fire. When he complied, she fetched a cloth and a small pot of salve. "This is a mixture my father taught me to make, bear grease and herbs. It helps with frostbite and burns." Her touch was gentle as she applied the salve to his cheek, her face close enough that he could count the light freckles across her nose. There was a competence in her movements that spoke of someone used to treating injuries. "Thank you," he said, suddenly aware of how rarely he allowed anyone this close to him. "We look after each other out here," she replied simply. "It's how we survive." As the day progressed, the storm showed no signs of abating. They settled into a routine of necessity, tending to the fire, checking on the animals every few hours, and preserving their food and water supplies. In the close quarters of the cabin, they began to learn each other's rhythms and habits. Colt noticed how Vivian hummed softly while she worked, old hymns mostly, and how she had a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. Small details he normally wouldn't have registered about another person. By evening, the temperature had dropped further. Even with the fire burning steadily, the cabin grew cold enough that their breath fogged in the air. They pulled chairs close to the hearth, wrapping themselves in whatever blankets were available. "The last time it was this cold, Father and I slept right here by the fire," Vivian said, her voice quiet with memory. "He told me stories of Ireland, where his parents came from. Said the winters there were damp rather than bitter, but somehow got into your bones all the same." "My mother used to say something similar about Boston winters," Colt offered, surprising himself with the personal detail. Is that where you're from, Boston? Originally, he nodded. Left when I was 14 after she died, worked my way west with odd jobs until the war started. No other family. None that claimed me, Colt said with a shrug. My father wasn't the marrying kind, apparently. Vivian regarded him with sympathy but not pity, a distinction Colt appreciated. We make our own families out here, I think. Not always by blood. As the night deepened and the wind screamed around the cabin's corners, the temperature continued to drop dangerously. Vivian emerged from her room with every available blanket, adding them to their collection by the fire. We should conserve heat, she said practically. Back to back is the most proper arrangement, I think. Colt nodded, understanding both her suggestion and her concerns. They arranged the blankets into a makeshift pallet near the fireplace, then sat side by side, their shoulders touching. Will your employer be worried when you don't reach Silverton? Vivian asked, attempting conversation to distract from the awkwardness of their situation. Thornton knows the mountains well enough to expect delays this time of year, Colt replied. But yes, eventually he'll wonder. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Despite the blankets, Vivian shivered visibly. You're freezing, Colt observed. I'm fine, she insisted, but her trembling belied her words. After a moment's hesitation, Colt made a decision. Vivian, I know this isn't conventional, but may I put my arm around you? For warmth only, I give you my word. She considered his offer, weighing propriety against practical necessity. Finally, she nodded. For warmth, she agreed. Carefully, respectfully, Colt placed his arm around her shoulders. She tensed initially, then gradually relaxed as the shared body heat began to provide relief from the biting cold. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Tell me about your ranch, Vivian said eventually, her voice soft in the darkness, the one you hope to have someday. Colt was startled by her perception. What makes you think I want a ranch of my own? Every cowboy I've ever met dreams of his own spread, she replied with a small smile he could hear rather than see, even the ones who claim they're happy writing for someone else's brand. Fair enough, he conceded with a low chuckle. I've been saving, not enough yet, but someday. Something modest, good water rights, decent grazing land, maybe a small herd to start. Where? Colorado, I think. I've seen most of the territories, and this one feels right somehow. The mountains, the valleys. It's harsh but beautiful. Yes, she agreed softly, it is. As the night wore on and the fire burned low, Vivian's head eventually came to rest against Colt's shoulder, her breathing deep and even in sleep. He remained awake, acutely aware of her trust in him, a woman alone in the wilderness, allowing a stranger this proximity. It was a responsibility he took seriously, a trust he would not betray. Vivian stirred in her sleep, shivering despite their shared warmth. Carefully, Colt adjusted their position, drawing her closer to the fire and wrapping the blankets more securely around them both. As he held her close by the fire, he felt her tremble, not from fear, but from the bitter cold that threatened even through the cabin walls. Something shifted in Colt's chest then, a protective instinct he thought he'd buried years ago alongside fallen comrades. In that moment, watching her sleep against his shoulder, he recognized a dangerous truth. The walls he had built around himself weren't as impenetrable as he'd believed. Dawn broke with eerie stillness. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-coated trees that sparkled in the morning sun. Colt woke to find himself alone by the dying fire, the blankets tucked carefully around him. From the kitchen area came the soft sounds of Vivian preparing breakfast. Storms passed, she said when she noticed him stirring, but the snow's deep. The pass will still be closed for days. I should check on the animals, Colt said, rising and folding the blankets neatly. I already did, she replied, fed and watered them all. The lean-to needs more than just repairs, I'm afraid. We might need to rebuild it entirely. We have time, Colt said, then caught himself. I mean, if you want my help before I go. Vivian looked at him thoughtfully. I would appreciate that, she said finally, though I don't want to keep you from your business in Silverton. Thornton will understand the delay, Colt assured her. Besides, I wouldn't feel right leaving you with unfinished repairs, especially with winter far from over. Over the next 3 days, they fell into an easy rhythm of work and companionship. Colt dismantled the damaged Linta, while Vivian helped him design a sturdier replacement. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and communicating in the shorthand of people accustomed to practical labor. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation by the fire, gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Colt learned that Vivian had been engaged once to a young man back east who had died in the war, fighting for the Confederacy. She had followed her father west afterward, seeking escape from the pitying glances and whispered comments about poor Vivian O'Connor, whose beau died a rebel. In turn, Colt told her about his time in the cavalry, carefully edited to exclude the worst horrors, and his years on the cattle trails afterward. He described the camaraderie of cowboys and the solitude of night watches under star-filled skies. He even shared stories of his mother, a strong-willed Irish immigrant who had raised him alone in the crowded tenements of Boston. On the fourth morning, as they worked together repairing fence posts damaged by the storm, Vivian suddenly straightened, her gaze fixed on the distant ridge. Colt followed her line of sight and spotted 3 riders approaching slowly through the deep snow. "Are you expecting visitors?" he asked, hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. "No," she replied, tension evident in her voice, "but I recognize the lead rider, Luke Danvers. He's been trying to buy this land since Father died. For a fair price." "Half what it's worth," Vivian said grimly. "Claims a woman can't manage property alone. His offers come with unwelcome suggestions about other arrangements I might consider." Colt felt a surge of protective anger. "Would you like me to make myself scarce? It might cause talk if they find you here with a man." Vivian's chin lifted defiantly. "Let them talk. I've done nothing wrong and I won't hide like I have." Together they waited as the riders approached. Luke Danvers was a burly man in his 40s, with a thick mustache and cold eyes that assessed Colt with immediate suspicion. His companions were younger men with the hard looks of hired hands accustomed to rough work. "Miss O'Connor," Danvers called as they drew near, "checking to see if you survived the blizzard. Seems you had. Help." His gaze lingered on Colt, taking in his stance beside Vivian. "Mr. Danvers," Vivian acknowledged coolly. "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. This is Mr. Prescott, a traveler caught in the storm who's been kind enough to help with some repairs in exchange for shelter." "Mighty convenient," Danvers remarked with a suggestive tone that made Colt's jaw tighten. "Finding yourself a strong back right when you needed one." "The only thing convenient about a blizzard is surviving it," Colt interjected, his voice level but carrying an edge of warning. Miss O'Connor was generous enough to offer shelter when most would have turned a stranger away. Danvers dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow as he approached. "Well now, I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Luke Danvers, owner of the Rocking D Ranch east of here. He extended a hand which Colt shook briefly. "Colt Prescott. I work for the Double Cross near Durango." "Thornton's outfit," Danvers raised an eyebrow. "Long way from home, aren't you?" "On business to Silverton," Colt explained simply. The storm had other ideas. Danvers nodded, then turned his attention back to Vivian. "I came to make you another offer, Miss O'Connor. In light of this latest storm and the damage to your property, I'm willing to go up to $300 for the whole spread." "Still less than half its value," Vivian replied evenly. "And my answer remains the same, Mr. Danvers. This land is not for sale." "A woman alone can't manage a homestead in these mountains," Danvers insisted, his friendly facade slipping. "You're being stubborn at the expense of your own safety. Next storm might be worse, and you might not be lucky enough to have a passing cowboy to help you through it." "I managed before Mr. Prescott's arrival, and I'll manage after he continues on his way," Vivian said firmly. "Now if you'll excuse us, we have work to finish before the next snow." Danvers' expression darkened. "You should reconsider, Miss O'Connor. I won't be making this offer again. Winter's long in these parts, and accidents happen to those who insist on living alone in the wilderness." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Colt stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Danvers and Vivian. "Sounds like the lady's made her decision clear," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Best respect that and be on your way." For a moment Danvers sized Colt up, clearly calculating whether confrontation was worth the risk. Finally he shrugged and turned back toward his horse. "Think about it, Miss O'Connor," he called over his shoulder. "Offer stands until the end of the month. After that, well." Land values have a way of changing when properties fall into disrepair. They watched in silence as Danvers and his men rode away, their horses struggling through the deep snow. Once they were out of earshot, Vivian released a shaky breath. "He's becoming more aggressive," she said quietly. "Before, he at least pretended to be concerned about my welfare." "Has he threatened you before?" Colt asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not directly," Vivian admitted, "just implications, reminders of how dangerous it is for a woman alone, questions about who would help me if I fell ill or was injured." "Do you have friends in town, anyone you trust?" "Some," she nodded. "The Reverend and his wife have been kind. Sheriff Porter is fair-minded, though stretched thin across too much territory. But Danvers has influence. He employs half the men in the county, and his brother-in-law owns the general store." Colt frowned, understanding the precarious position she was in. "What does he want with your land? It's good property, but there must be other options if he's looking to expand." "Water rights," Vivian explained. "Father secured rights to Thompson Creek when he homesteaded. It's the most reliable water source in the area, even in drought years. Danvers has been buying up all the surrounding properties, but without our creek, his expanded herds would be vulnerable in dry seasons." The practical threat became clearer to Colt. A man like Danvers wouldn't stop at mere intimidation if enough money was at stake. Water in the West was worth more than gold in many cases, men killed over less every day. "The pass should be clear enough to travel by tomorrow," Vivian said, breaking into his thoughts. "You'll be able to continue to Silverton." "I could stay a few more days," Colt offered, "help finish the repairs." Vivian shook her head. "You've done more than enough already. Besides, your employer is expecting you, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for jeopardizing your position." That night their conversation over dinner was subdued, both aware of Colt's imminent departure and the renewed threat from Danvers. As they sat by the fire afterward, Vivian suddenly rose and went to a small chest in the corner of the room. She returned with a worn leather book. "My father's journal," she explained, sitting beside Colt. "He kept meticulous records of everything, weather patterns, crop yields, water levels in the creek. And this," she opened to a page near the back, revealing a hand-drawn map. "It shows the boundaries of our water rights, with all the proper markings and timestamps." Father was concerned about exactly this situation arising after he was gone. Colt studied the map carefully. "This would stand up in court if it came to that. Your father was thorough." "He anticipated trouble," Vivian said. "Told me never to show this to anyone I didn't trust completely." She paused, meeting Colt's eyes directly. "I'm showing you because I want someone else to know it exists in case." "In case something happens." The implication hung heavy between them. Colt felt the weight of her trust, unexpected and profound. "Vivian," he began, then hesitated, searching for the right words. "Danvers is a serious threat. Have you considered that selling might be the safer option? You could start fresh somewhere else." Her expression hardened. "And let him bully me off land that my father worked himself to death for, land that's rightfully mine? No. This is my home, and I won't be driven from it by fear or intimidation. Even if staying puts you in danger." "Some things are worth the risk," she said firmly. Colt studied her face in the firelight, the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. He recognized in her the same fierce independence that drove him, the unwillingness to be controlled by others' expectations or demands. But where his independence had led him to avoid connections, hers had given her something worth fighting for. "What if I came back?" he found himself saying. "After Silverton, I have 2 weeks before I'm expected back at the Double Cross. I could help you make some of the larger repairs, maybe build up your security a bit." Surprise flickered across Vivian's features. "You'd do that, why?" It was a fair question, one Colt wasn't entirely sure he could answer. "Because you helped me when you didn't have to," he said finally, "and because no one should have to face threats like Danvers alone." She considered his offer, wariness and hope battling in her expression. "I can't pay you much," she warned. "I'm not asking for payment," Colt assured her, "just a place to sleep and maybe a meal or two." "Like I said before," Vivian replied with a small smile, "we look after each other out here. It's how we survive." The following morning dawned clear and cold. Colt prepared Chance for the journey, packing his saddlebags while Vivian stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "The pass should be clear enough now," she said. "If you keep to the southern route, you should reach Silverton by nightfall." "I'll be back within 5 days," Colt promised, tightening Chance's saddle. "Sooner if I can wrap up Thornton's business quickly." Vivian nodded, then unexpectedly stepped forward and pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch on a cord. "My father sent Christopher Medal," she explained, "for safe travels." Colt was touched by the gesture, knowing how few mementos of her father she possessed. "I'll take good care of it," he promised, slipping the cord over his head and tucking the medal beneath his shirt. "See that you do," she replied with forced lightness. "I'll expect it back when you return." With a final nod, Colt mounted Chance and turned toward the trail. He looked back once to see Vivian standing before her cabin, a solitary figure against the vast white landscape. Something tightened in his chest at the sight, an emotion he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. The journey to Silverton was arduous but uneventful. The snow-packed trail required careful navigation, but Chance was sure-footed, and Colt was experienced in winter travel. He reached the mining town as dusk settled over the mountains, finding lodging at a modest boarding house before seeking out Thornton's timber contact the next morning. The business took 3 days to complete, inspecting lumber quality, negotiating prices, and finalizing delivery schedules. Throughout the meetings, Colt found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to Vivian and her isolated cabin. The threat from Danvers nagged at him, as did the memory of her determined face as she refused to be driven from her home. On the evening of the 3rd day, with contracts signed and his obligations to Thornton fulfilled, Colt sat in Silverton's only decent saloon, nursing a whiskey. 2 miners at a nearby table were discussing local news, and a name caught Colt's attention. "Danvers is determined to get that O'Connor place," one miner said. "Heard him talking to Jenkins about how that stubborn girl needs to learn she can't manage alone." "What's he planning?" the second miner asked. "Didn't say exactly, but Jenkins hired on 3 new men yesterday. Rough types, not regular ranch hands. Word is they're heading out to persuade the O'Connor woman that selling is her best option." Colt's blood ran cold. He drained his whiskey, left money on the table, and strode directly to the boarding house. Within an hour, he had settled his bill and prepared Chance for departure, despite the innkeeper's warnings about traveling the mountain passes at night. The journey back was treacherous. Darkness made the trail nearly impossible to follow, and a light snow had begun to fall, further obscuring landmarks. Colt pushed on relentlessly, guided by instinct and desperation. By dawn, he had covered half the distance to Vivian's homestead, but both he and Chance were exhausted. He allowed a brief rest at a sheltered outcropping, then continued as soon as there was enough light to safely navigate. It was mid-afternoon when Colt finally crested the ridge overlooking Vivian's property. What he saw made him urge Chance into a gallop despite the dangerous footing. 3 horses were tethered outside her cabin, and smoke was rising, not from the chimney but from the barn. Drawing his revolver, Colt approached cautiously, dismounting when he reached the edge of the clearing. The barn was fully engulfed in flames, the frightened bleating of goats audible even over the roar of the fire. 2 men stood watching the blaze, rifles in hand, while a third emerged from the cabin, dragging Vivian by the arm. She was fighting fiercely, despite a bruise blooming on her cheekbone and blood on her lower lip. "You won't get away with this," she shouted. "Sheriff Porter will." "Sheriff's 2 days' ride from here," the man holding her sneered, "and accidents happen all the time to women living alone. Especially clumsy ones who knock over lamps near hay storage." Colt assessed the situation rapidly. 3 armed men, Vivian as hostage, and the fire spreading quickly toward the cabin. A frontal assault would put her directly in the line of fire. He needed a distraction. Moving silently through the trees, Colt circled to approach from behind the tethered horses. With careful aim, he fired a shot that narrowly missed the lead horse, causing all 3 animals to rear in panic, pulling free from their tethers and bolting. "What the hell?" one of the men by the barn shouted, turning toward the commotion. In that moment of confusion, Colt emerged from cover and fired again, this time hitting the man in the shoulder. The wounded man dropped his rifle, howling in pain. "Let her go," Colt called to the man holding Vivian. "Now or the next shot won't be so merciful." The remaining unwounded man raised his rifle, but Vivian seized her opportunity. She drove her elbow sharply into her captor's stomach, then stomped hard on his instep. As he loosened his grip, she twisted away and dropped to the ground, giving Colt a clear shot. Drop your weapons, Colt commanded, his voice deadly calm. Both of you. The man who had been holding Vivian hesitated, then reached slowly for his sidearm. Colt fired without hesitation, the bullet striking the man's right arm. He yelped in pain, his unfired revolver falling to the snow. The third man, seeing his companions wounded, wisely lowered his rifle. Kick it away, Colt ordered. When the man complied, Colt moved forward, keeping his revolver trained on the trio. Vivian, are you all right? Yes, she said, rising shakily to her feet. The goats, we need to get them out of the barn. It's too late, Colt said grimly, glancing at the fully engulfed structure. We need to protect the cabin now, or you'll lose everything. Working quickly, they gathered snow to pack against the side of the cabin nearest the burning barn, creating a buffer against the heat and flying embers. All the while, Colt kept his revolver ready, ensuring the 3 injured men made no move toward their discarded weapons. When the immediate danger to the cabin had passed, Colt used rope from his saddlebags to bind the men's hands. The one he had shot in the shoulder would need medical attention soon, but it could wait until they had answers. Danvers sent you, Vivian said, facing the captured men. It wasn't a question. The apparent leader, nursing his wounded arm, glared at her defiantly. You should have taken his offer. So you could burn me out instead, or worse, she turned to Colt. We need to get them to Sheriff Porter. Nearest law is in Gunnison, Colt noted. 2 days' ride at least. Then we'd better get started, Vivian said firmly. I'll pack what I need. While Vivian gathered essential supplies from the cabin, Colt secured the prisoners to their saddles. The horses had returned once the gunfire ceased, allowing for transportation. 2 of the men would need to share a mount due to their injuries. As Vivian emerged from the cabin with a small bundle of belongings, she paused to look at the smoldering remains of her barn. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Everything my father built, she whispered. They would have burned it all if you hadn't come. We'll rebuild, Colt said without thinking, then caught himself. I mean, you'll rebuild. Better than before. Vivian looked at him with an unreadable expression. Yes, she said after a moment, we will. The journey to Gunnison was arduous. Winter travel was difficult enough without 3 sullen, injured prisoners to manage. They made camp the first night in a sheltered grove of pines, far enough from any trails that Danvers' men, should he send more, wouldn't easily find them. As they sat by their small, carefully shielded fire, Vivian finally allowed herself to process the day's events. Her shoulders trembled, though whether from cold or delayed shock, Colt couldn't tell. You came back early, she observed quietly. How did you know? Overheard some talk in Silverton, Colt explained. Danvers was making his move sooner than I expected. You could have been killed, she said, coming back alone, facing 3 armed men. So could you, Colt replied simply. Staying alone, facing 3 armed men. The firelight flickered across her bruised face, highlighting her resilience even in this moment of vulnerability. Why did you really come back, Colt? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, demanding a truth Colt had been avoiding since the moment he'd first felt her tremble in his arms by the fire. His carefully constructed walls of solitude and self-protection seemed suddenly flimsy in the face of what he'd almost lost today. Because the thought of not coming back was worse than any danger I might face in returning, he admitted finally. Because in 4 days, you somehow became someone I couldn't bear to leave behind. Vivian's eyes widened at his honesty. I thought I was imagining it, she said softly, that it was just gratitude or loneliness making me feel this way. In what way is that? Colt asked, heart pounding. Like perhaps the frontier doesn't have to mean being alone, she replied. Like perhaps there's room for both independence and connection. Their captive's presence prevented anything more than this quiet exchange of truths, but something fundamental had shifted between them, a recognition of possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider before. They reached Gunnison late the following day, delivering their prisoners directly to Sheriff Porter, a grizzled veteran of the frontier with a reputation for fairness. After hearing their account and examining the prisoners, he nodded gravely. I've been watching Danvers for years, he admitted. Man's been buying up land by any means necessary, but this is the first time I've had solid evidence of criminal activity. These boys will talk eventually, especially facing prison terms. What about Danvers himself? Vivian asked. He'll just send more men. Not if I serve him with arrest warrants first, Porter replied. Conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, destruction of property, these charges will stick, especially with 3 witnesses ready to testify to save their own skins. How long will that take? Colt asked. I'll ride out tomorrow with my deputies, Porter assured them. Meanwhile, you two should stay in town until we have Danvers in custody. Mrs. Porter would be happy to have company at our home, Miss O'Connor. They accepted the sheriff's hospitality gratefully, though Colt took a room at the local hotel. The following morning, after Porter and his deputies departed for Danvers Ranch, Colt and Vivian found themselves with an unexpected day of respite in town. They walked together down Gunnison's Main Street, Vivian's arm tucked into Colt's, presenting a picture of propriety to the curious townspeople. The bruise on her cheek raised eyebrows, but also sympathetic glances from those who had heard whispered versions of events. What will you do now? Colt asked as they paused outside the general store. Your barn is gone, and winter's far from over. Rebuild, Vivian said without hesitation. It won't be easy, but that land is still mine, and I won't be driven from it. Alone, the question escaped before Colt could stop himself. Vivian turned to face him fully, her expression serious but soft. That depends, she said carefully, on whether I have reason to believe I might not be alone anymore. Colt took a deep breath, realizing they had reached a crossroads he hadn't anticipated when he first sought shelter at her cabin during the blizzard. The solitary path he had walked for so long now branched, offering a direction he had convinced himself was closed to him. I've spent years believing attachment was a weakness, he said honestly. That caring for someone meant eventually losing them, one way or another. The frontier isn't kind to hopeful hearts. No, Vivian agreed, it isn't, but perhaps that's precisely why hope matters more out here than anywhere else. 2 days later, Sheriff Porter returned to Gunnison with Luke Danvers in custody. The evidence against him was irrefutable. Not only had his men confessed to acting on his orders, but documents found at his ranch revealed a pattern of intimidation and fraud against other local landowners. With the immediate threat neutralized, Colt and Vivian prepared to return to her homestead. The night before their departure, they sat together on the porch of the Porters' home, watching stars emerge in the clear winter sky. I sent a telegram to Thornton today, Colt said, explaining the situation and requesting an extended leave of absence. What did he say? Vivian asked, her voice careful, as though afraid to hope. That good hands are valuable, but so is a man's word. He'll hold my position until spring if I want to return. Colt turned to face her. But I also asked about selling my share of the spring herd. Vivian's eyes widened. Your savings for your own ranch someday. Yes, Colt nodded. Enough to rebuild your barn properly, with improvements. Enough to add to your herd and see us, through until next winter, if you're amenable to a partnership of sorts. What kind of partnership did you have in mind, Mr. Prescott? Vivian asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite her serious tone. Colt felt his heart hammer against his ribs, facing a moment more terrifying than any gunfight. The permanent kind, Miss O'Connor, if you'll have me. Not because you need protection or help with your land, but because these past days have shown me that the frontier's harshness is bearable when faced together, and its beauty more remarkable when shared. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but her smile bloomed full and radiant. I never expected to find love in a blizzard, she said softly, or to discover that the very independence I've fought so hard to maintain could accommodate partnership without surrender. Is that a yes? Colt asked, hope rising in his chest. Yes, Vivian whispered, 1,000 times yes. Spring came to the Colorado mountains in fits and starts, melting snow giving way to verdant explosion of wildflowers and fresh grass. On the O'Connor homestead, now the Prescott O'Connor Ranch, as the newly revised deed proclaimed, the scars of winter's violence were healing beneath new construction. The barn rose larger and sturdier than before, built with lumber from Silverton and the willing hands of neighbors who recognized the value of standing together against men like Danvers. The goat herd, replenished with animals purchased from a ranch in Durango, grazed contentedly in paddocks protected by new fencing. And on a bright May morning, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains standing sentinel in the distance, Colt Prescott and Vivian O'Connor exchanged vows before Reverend Walsh from Gunnison. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by those who had helped them rebuild, Sheriff Porter and his wife, neighboring ranchers, and even Thomas Thornton, who had ridden from Durango with a fine heifer calf as a wedding gift. That evening, as twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Colt and Vivian stood together on the porch of their cabin, expanded now with a new room added for the family they hoped to start. "Hard to believe it was only 4 months ago that I was struggling through that blizzard," Colt remarked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Looking for shelter from the storm," Vivian added with a smile. "And finding something neither of us expected." "I spent so many years convinced that the frontier demanded solitude," Colt said, looking out over the land they now shared. "That attachments were vulnerabilities to be avoided at all costs." "And now," Vivian asked, turning in his embrace to face him, "now I understand that true strength isn't found in isolation," he replied. "It's found in building something worth protecting, in facing hardship together rather than alone." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they moved inside to the hearth that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely love story. Colt built up the fire against the mountain chill that lingered even in spring, then drew Vivian close beside him on the bearskin rug. "Remember that first night?" he asked softly. "During the blizzard. When you held me by the fire and felt me tremble," Vivian smiled, nestling closer. "I was so cold and so afraid to trust a stranger." "And now?" "Now I tremble for entirely different reasons," she whispered, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "And you're no stranger, Colt Prescott, you're home." The fire crackled warmly as Colt lowered his lips to hers, no longer the cautious cowboy who believed love had no place on the frontier, but a man who had discovered that even in the wild, untamed West, the heart could find its rightful home.